The Hightower family is a massive part of House of the Dragon. It's a fascinating house, to be honest, but they're not in Game of Thrones at all. If you've been watching House of the Dragon, you'll know that the Hightower family isn't a family that just quietly disappears. This is one of the oldest, richest, most powerful houses in all of Westeros. But before we get to the timeline of Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen in a Game of Thrones, let's go all the way back and talk about the entire history of the Hightowers, I guess. Well, most of the interesting parts anyway. Their rise, their fall, and how it all happened. How a small house of bannermen basically ruled the Seven Kingdoms, and then why they aren't in HBO's Game of Thrones TV show. So buckle up, make sure you've got a brew, and let's dive into the Hightowers. The sigil of House Hightower is a stone white watchtower with a fire on top. Their seat is the Hightower, located in the city of Oldtown. Their motto is "We light the way," and they possess a Valyrian steel sword called Vigilance, the sword that Ormund Hightower has during the dance. Anyway, if a house has a Valyrian steel sword in Westeros, they're probably quite important. Although the Hightowers aren't historically as important as some of the major ward houses that we know and love, like the Starks, Lannisters, Tyrells, more on the Tyrells later, because they have quite a big impact into why the Hightowers kind of faded from relevance. The Hightowers were definitely punching above their weight for quite a long time. The Hightower itself is the tallest structure in the Seven Kingdoms, even higher than the 700-foot wall. The people of Oldtown can tell the time of day by the tower's shadow, and some claim that the wall can be seen from its top. The Hightowers are among one of the oldest and proudest of the houses of the realm, and they've often preferred trade instead of war and have avoided many wars because of their support for the faith of the Seven. In House of the Dragon, you'll see Alicent wearing a necklace with the seven-pointed Star of the Seven throughout the show. When Rhaenyra takes the throne, the High Septon refuses to officially anoint her because of the faith's loyalty to the Hightowers. The house goes hand in hand with religion. The Hightowers backed the faith of the Seven early. They let the Starry Sept get built in Oldtown, and that sept was the actual centre of the faith for 1,000 years before King's Landing's Great Sept of Baelor even existed. This is kind of the blueprint for the entire family going forward: trade over war, religion over conquest. The Hightowers sat in the shadows in the background, while cleverly being puppeteers. Some of the legendary early Hightowers are worth mentioning. King Uthor of the Hightower supposedly had Bran the Builder, who went on to found House Stark, design the first fully stone version of the tower. His son, Perimor the Twisted, gathered the scholars who eventually founded the Citadel, and Lymond Hightower, known as the Sea Lion, beat back an Ironborn invasion and married his daughter into House Gardner, which is what brought Oldtown under Highgarden's rule in the first place, Highgarden being the beautiful home of House Tyrell during the Game of Thrones show. That's quite a lot of history pretty quickly in a video like this, so if you're not keeping up, don't worry. This next bit is quite important though. You've probably heard of Aegon the Conqueror, the Targaryen king who fled the doom of Valyria to come over to Westeros and basically form the Seven Kingdoms. Well, when Aegon the Conqueror showed up, Lord Manfred Hightower, who was head of the house at the time, didn't fight him. He opened the gates of Oldtown. That single decision spared Oldtown from being burnt to a crisp, and then the High Septon, who, as we already know, works hand in hand with the Hightowers, reluctantly anointed Aegon as the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, which then gave the entire conquest the religious legitimacy it wouldn't have had otherwise. And remember in the intro when I said we'd come back to the Tyrells? Well, the time is now, so listen up. During his conquest, Aegon the Conqueror generally allowed royal families to continue ruling their respective regions so long as they bent the knee. They then became the Great Houses, loyal to the Targaryens, yet able to continue governing. When it came to the Reach, however, that didn't work out. The old ruling house was called the Gardeners, but they were wiped out. So Aegon had to choose a family to take their place. He skipped over the wealthy Hightowers and named the Tyrells, lowly stewards to the Gardeners, as Lord Paramount. Aegon did this for a reason. He knew that if he handed power to any one of the greater houses, it would cause immense tension among them. The Tyrells were the Gardeners' stewards, so they were honorary rulers without any real royal status. By elevating the Tyrells, Aegon avoided war and conflict between the higher noble houses of the Reach. Additionally, he ensured that this highly valuable region was ruled by a family completely indebted to him. Pretty smart when you think about it. The Tyrells weren't born into their status, rather it was a gift from the almighty Targaryens. So the Hightowers, with all their ancient wealth and power, would never feel that sort of reverence for Aegon and he knew it. And maybe that's why the Hightowers have such a chip on their shoulder in House of the Dragon. Technically, they never ruled the Reach or Highgarden at all, they were just really influential bannermen, which makes it even more impressive to see how high they climbed. 25 years after the conquest, Cerys Hightower, daughter of Lord Manfred Hightower, wed Maegor Targaryen, also known as Maegor the Cruel, who was the third Targaryen king. This was only after the High Septon objected against Maegor wedding his own sister, and of course suggested a Hightower cause they're best friends forever. Cerys was only queen for 3 years, but it was the first look at a Hightower being close to the Iron Throne. The next 75 years were fairly uneventful for the Hightowers until Otto Hightower was asked to be the next hand of the king to Jaehaerys Targaryen. Considered a man of great learning of his time, Otto Hightower was also proud, haughty, blunt, and domineering. He was a cautious, methodical, and ambitious man, and he was resented and envied by many. Otto's greatest rival was Prince Daemon Targaryen, as we see in Season 1 of House of the Dragon. Otto was hand of the king to Jaehaerys I and then Viserys I. When Queen Aemma died in childbirth, Otto sent his own daughter Alicent to comfort the grieving king. The two of them then eventually ended up getting married and having many children that started the Dance of the Dragons. Before this though, Alicent grew up really close friends with Rhaenyra, before the politics of the realm tore them apart completely. Otto Hightower basically governed the kingdom for much of this time as Hand of the King, and Otto is seen as kind of the puppet master of the dance, wanting his Hightower Greens to take power, but people often forget that Otto originally supported Rhaenyra's claim to the throne, not necessarily out of loyalty, but purely because he was terrified that Daemon Targaryen would become a second Maegor the Cruel if he ever took power. And Daemon had always wanted the throne for himself. It was only once that Alicent had sons of her own that Otto flips completely and started pushing to have her son, his grandson, Aegon, named heir instead. His consistent badgering about the succession eventually gets him fired as Hand of the King. He goes back to Old Town, builds the Green faction from there. The name The Greens literally comes from a green dress that Alicent wore to a tourney once, and Otto then gets reinstated right before Viserys dies. It's mainly Otto's conspiracy at Viserys' deathbed that puts Aegon on the Iron Throne over Rhaenyra. That one act is what starts the entire war. As we've seen in Season 3 of House of the Dragon, he's eventually executed by Rhaenyra and Daemon once the Blacks retake King's Landing. While Otto and Alicent are in King's Landing playing at politics, the actual Lord of Hightower and head of the family during the war is Otto's nephew, Ormund Hightower. He's the one who leads the Reach's actual armies for the Greens, and the one constantly smelling mysterious substances in the show. Here's where spoilers for the show come in, so if you don't want that, pause here, set an alarm on your phone, and come back to this point in the video, and I'll see you in a second. I won't give all the details away though, obviously, so don't stress too much if you want to carry on watching. Light spoilers, I guess. At the Battle of Honeywine, Ormund's army gets trapped between two hostile forces on the riverbanks. It looks like it's going to be a total loss, and he's going to have to be sniffing all of his smelly potions more and more until his squire, Prince Daeron Targaryen, who has grown up basically as Ormund's pawn, shows up riding his cool-looking purple dragon, Tessarion, and turns the entire battle around. Ormund doesn't survive the war though, he's killed at the First Battle of Tumbleton. Even though he passes, Ormund's army still wins that battle, thanks to a big betrayal in the Greens' favour. I'm not going to say who this is, but I can't wait to see this bit on the show. Ormund's 15-year-old son, Lionel, takes over as Lord of Hightower, and then in one of the most scandalous footnotes in this entire family's history, Lionel takes his own father's widow, his stepmother, Samantha Tarly, as his own lover. The Septons definitely didn't like that one. Lots happens over the next few years, but Samantha goes on to found the Bank of Old Town. So while most of the great houses are left devastated by the war, the Hightowers come out on the other side much richer. The war that the Hightowers arguably started ends up bankrupting everyone else and making them richer than ever before. It's the perfect crime. Now we get to the point in the timeline between House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones. Between the two shows, there's an entire century of Hightower history that the show just never really touches. And there are some genuinely great characters buried in there. There's Gerald Hightower, who is maybe the most quietly legendary Hightower in the whole saga. Gerald was Lord Commander of the Kingsguard under the Mad King, king Aerys II. Jaime Lannister years later puts him in the same sentence as Arthur Dayne and Barristan Selmy, two of the greatest warriors Westeros has ever seen, as proof of how far the Kingsguard has fallen since. So Gerald was a pretty good knight himself. Gerald was there when Aerys burned Rickard and Brandon Stark alive, and it's Gerald who turns to a horrified young Jaime Lannister and says the line, "You swore a vow to guard the king, not to judge him." Gerald dies at the Tower of Joy, you know that part where we finally find out that Jon Snow is the son of a Targaryen and a Stark. He falls alongside the legendary warrior Arthur Dayne, fighting Ned Stark and Howland Reed at the climax of Robert's Rebellion. So technically there is a Hightower in Game of Thrones, he's just in it for about 30 seconds and you don't know that he's a Hightower. Leighton Hightower is the head of the family during the main book timeline. He hasn't come down from the top of the tower in over a decade. He rules the city from up there. And he actually turned down an offer to marry one of his Hightower daughters to Tyrion Lannister, as he thought it as an insult. Another of his daughters, Alicent Hightower, married to Mace Tyrell of Highgarden. This is a huge one. Alicent is mother of Margaery Tyrell, one of the main characters for a long time in Game of Thrones, the one who marries Joffrey. Therefore, every major Tyrell character we see across 8 seasons of Game of Thrones is half Hightower. Mind blown. The Hightower name just never comes up. Let's go into a couple of other moments where the Hightowers could have potentially been shown more in the show, but just weren't. Old Town itself barely appears in the show. We get the Citadel, where Sam trains to be a maester, but almost nothing of the city or the family that actually rules it. We do get a couple of distant shots of the Hightower itself, and there's even a line where a ship's captain tells Sam that Leighton and the Mad Maid are locked up in the tower doing something. But that's basically it. Sam's Citadel storyline gets heavily trimmed for the show. In the books, it's much longer and way more tangled up in Old Town's actual politics. The show compresses it down into a small personal arc for Sam, so there's never really a natural door for Leighton or any other Hightower to appear. There's an entire Euron Greyjoy plot in the books about the invasion of the Reach. It's just not in the TV show at all, as the show's Euron is very different to George R.R. Martin's Euron in the books. That's a storyline that would have actually forced the Hightowers into the main plot in the later seasons of HBO's show, but it just doesn't happen. The Hightowers aren't actually erased from Game of Thrones, they're there in the background. They're not at the peak of their powers as we see in House of the Dragon anyway. But I am really glad that non-book readers get to see how cool the Hightower family is in House of the Dragon. Super interesting to see the rise, the fall, then the stagnation of House Hightower. A very interesting house in the world of Ice and Fire.